Hello and welcome to another edition of the Blood Red Morning Bulletin. My name is Emmet Gates and today I'm joined by my fellow Liverpool.com colleague Dave Comerford. And Dave, this is the first morning bulletin of the week, and obviously we have to address the Saturday's 4-1 defeat to Manchester City. Liverpool hadn't played for nearly 3 weeks, and obviously fans were eagerly anticipating a game against a team that many consider now to be rivals in terms of battling for trophies, but it really didn't look that way on Saturday, did it? It was all one way, and you kind of wish that Liverpool really hadn't played and the international break was still on, considering the way the game unfolded.
Yeah, we returned to action with one of our bleakest defeats of the season, you'd have to say. And I think, personally watching it, it was one of the most frustrating and most painful Liverpool games I've seen, really. And that's obviously a bold statement given how many we've had this season, I suppose. And, even before that, in the Klopp era, we had some bad ones. But I think there was something about playing a team who had been our kind of main rivals throughout the Klopp era, had been our closest competitors, games that normally mean a lot in the title race. And to see the gulf of class that has emerged in such a short space of time was extra dispiriting, really. And I think just also, the way the game petered out so quickly in the second half after being at least a contest in the first, with the supporters chanting "Ole," the away end emptying out, things like that. I mean, I wrote in one of my articles yesterday that it looked like both the fans and the players just wanted to go home. To be honest, when it got to 3-1, and it felt like a unique low point in that sense. I mean, the players just literally threw the towel in, and it was like we were just a plaything of Man City, really. So yeah, the thing with it is, I wouldn't ordinarily think that losing to Man City is a defining result in a top four race. If you're a top four level team rather than a title contender, you're probably going to lose that game, realistically. But it's the manner of the performance, the attitude, and I suppose our struggles when we do play the weaker sides in the more winnable games that make it such a concern, I think.
Yeah, I think you touched on a very good point there. It's not the fact that Liverpool lost 4-1 in and of itself. I mean, that can happen in a game of football. Um, I think, as you said, it was more of the meekness, the way the team just kind of folded almost as soon as the second goal went in.
Mm.
As soon as De Bruyne scored at the beginning of the second half, you knew it was just going to go one way. And many of the goals, there was no, as Jurgen Klopp pointed out, in his press conference post game, there was no challenges. There was the fight just seemed to have left the players, and that's kind of the most dispiriting thing. You can lose 4-1, but you put in a shift
Mm.
and you battle for every ball, and you just sometimes don't get the breaks, and or the opposition just seems to score with every shot. But as you say, it was the not the defeat in itself, but the manner of it, the
Yeah.
performance was probably the worst takeaway you could take, from the game. And Liverpool haven't lost this many games in a Premier League season since 2014-15. So we're talking 8 years. So this is the worst season of the Klopp era. How, do you think the defeat on Saturday? Do you think there'll be consequences for Chelsea on Tuesday and going forward? Do you think the results now this could spark a downturn, or do you think Jurgen Klopp will rally the troops and things will be okay in the next couple of games?
I mean, this team doesn't really conform to logic like that. We look at the 7-0 against Man United. We look at all the other results this season that we could have used as a sort of launch pad. Didn't really have any lasting effect. Equally, we've been able to get those results in spite of all the lows that we've suffered. So, we are kind of hard to read, hard to predict in that sense. The problem in terms of a reaction is, you look at the bench against City, and it actually looks pretty good. I think they were even saying in commentary that it was arguably better than what than what City had, given some injuries that they might have. But how many of those players do you look at and say genuinely make a compelling case to start to come into the team? Because ordinarily you'd want to make sort of 4, 5, maybe even 6 changes after a game like we saw at the Etihad. But I just don't see the other options necessarily improving things, with the exception probably of Nunez, who I think should come in for Jota, who is obviously really struggling at the moment. So that's possibly one change. But yeah, I think it points to a bit of a problem that you're kind of stuck in a bit of a malaise when you can't even turn to, the supposedly really good depth that you have to get you out of the situation. And I think on the brighter side, I am a lot more optimistic for these next two. I think obviously Chelsea are a far weaker team than City. I have just sacked the manager, which might change things, but maybe we'll come on to that in a minute. And Arsenal then at the weekend, which again, the best team in the league this season, objectively, but at Anfield we are a different beast, especially in those big games. So I think there's more available for us in these next couple of games, but it's hard to kind of see where it comes from beyond just kind of the idiosyncrasies of this team, really.
Yeah, exactly, Dave. And well, now that you've touched on it, let's address Chelsea sacking Graham Potter last night. Their second managerial departure of the season. Did it shock you? And how do you think Chelsea will react on Tuesday? Because generally, the way these things tend to go is that when a new manager comes in, there's that fresh coach or different person, bounce back mentality almost. And the first game or the first couple of games is an upward trajectory in performances. Do you think this will happen for Chelsea? And obviously, the first game is against Liverpool on Tuesday. Should you be worried from a Liverpool perspective, or do you think, well, Chelsea's just as bad as we are, so we should be fine?
Well, to start with the first bit about whether it's a surprise, yes and no, because results wise alone, you'd think that no manager of a top side could survive that. I mean, there'd probably be managers in kind of mid-table positions who'd be under a lot of pressure with the kind of run that Graham Potter's been on. But they kind of boxed themselves into a corner a little bit, because they were consistently putting out this message that, we're going to back him. He's our long-term manager. It's a long-term project. We'll suffer the initial pain. But then I suppose the short-term pain became too great to tolerate, really. And now they look really foolish, I suppose, for persisting for so long with Potter, because there's been multiple opportunities to sack him already, you could argue, even though he was only appointed in September, I think it was. So it's a bit of yes and no, like I say, and obviously we'll see who they go for as the permanent successor in the short term. They've appointed Bruno, the former Brighton player, and I think that's interesting because he is someone who's a member of Potter's coaching staff. So do you get maybe the full extent of the new manager bounce if it's a voice that you are already sort of hearing? I think, don't get me wrong, there probably will be an improvement, and I was kind of rolling my eyes when the news came out. But we'll see how much of an impact he can make. I think what's also interesting is when Potter has gone up against Klopp recently, I've kind of always been a bit apprehensive, because I think he's a manager who, and I probably still rate Graham Potter in spite of what happened at Chelsea, I think he's a manager who is able to kind of game plan for specific matches really well, and we saw that probably more so at Brighton. And he was usually able to kind of pick holes in Klopp's teams. I think we saw that probably in the 2-2 draw at Anfield last season. I think obviously Liverpool won at the Amex, but it was they gave us a much better game in Anfield. So I think from that standpoint, Klopp hasn't always had the easiest time against Potter, so maybe he could actually have, Potter could still actually have got a result against him, and he probably, I think any decent manager fancies their chances of exploiting the weaknesses in this Liverpool team, because they are quite glaring, to be fair. So I think from that standpoint, in terms of the managerial matchup, it might not actually be the worst thing. But yeah, I think most Liverpool fans would have preferred the chance to kind of KO Potter themselves, I suppose, rather than the change coming just before they went to Stamford Bridge.
Yeah, I don't think, as you said, any manager should be judged on a stint at Chelsea, considering that the sack managers will be 6 weeks or so. Um, but yeah, it will be interesting to see who Chelsea hire long term. Because I mean, to be honest, like these two have been the most two disappointing of the big teams in the
Mm.
Premier League this season. You know, obviously Liverpool, what, sixth now, Chelsea's 10th. Um, these two probably at the start of the season would have predicted themselves to be in the top four. It obviously hasn't panned out that way. So it is kind of a battle of the two most disappointing big teams of the season. And do you think if Liverpool don't win at Stamford Bridge, do you think that his Champions League chance is gone, or how do you see it, playing out? Because at that point, then there'd be 10 games left. You think there's still enough time to rectify the situation?
I'd say so. I think you basically just reduce your margin for error even further. You're looking at those last 10 games, you're going to have to put together a kind of elite level run of form across those 10. Um, I think they were saying in commentary the other day that 6 of the last 10 are at Anfield, which is obviously a big help. I mean, we're looking at a team here who is, I think, third in the Premier League for home form, 9 wins out of 13, and only 1 defeat. And then away form, I did an article on this yesterday, is it's the worst away record Liverpool have had since the very first Premier League season. So
30 years, essentially.
yes, exactly. So surprisingly, not the worst, but close. Unfortunately, so I think that the Anfield factor is big, having that kind of having the majority being home games. And I always think with the top four, if you can put together that sustained run, it does change the picture a lot. But there's no getting away from the fact that it is a really important game. Just because the gap is going to potentially start looking really, really daunting and not very realistic at all. If it hasn't reached that point already, really, if we aren't able to get the 3 points, and I suppose you can look at it objectively and say it is the team in 11th place away from home. Obviously, they've got much more quality than that position would suggest. So it'll be very, very difficult. But Liverpool have been to Spurs this season and won. So hopefully they can kind of replicate that. Because it would, I think, as much as Chelsea have struggled, it would feel like potentially a really big win in terms of what you say, in terms of setting things on the right foot for those last 10 games. And yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we will indeed, Dave. We will indeed. But that wraps us up for this morning. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and hopefully, Dave, the next time that me and you are on together, Liverpool will be in better form. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and see you next time.